Welcome to Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design, the podcast that dives deep into the heart of thriving through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. If you aspire towards exceptional parenthood and are looking to navigate the joys and challenges of raising children in our fast-paced world, you've found your tribe. I'm Philippa Scott and
I'm Philippa Cox. Together we're Philippa Squared, unpacking the real talk on modern parenting, peeling back the layers of its complexity from pregnancy and birth to the adventures beyond. This podcast is your guide to unraveling the nuances of parenting in today's world.
we're keeping it real, sharing stories and having conversations with insightful guests, giving you clarity and direction on your parenting journey.
This is where your adventure begins, transforming the challenge into a journey of wonder and joy, where you discover ways to craft your own parenthood map, not just follow the one handed down to you.
So settle in, get comfy, and let's laugh, learn, and grow into the parent you aspire to be. Welcome to Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design. On today's episode, we speak with Melissa Rohlfs. She's a certified holistic health and life coach, helping busy mums and teen girls find freedom from the struggle with food so that they can be at peace with food, their bodies, and their lives. She's committed to helping teen girls and women cultivate a healthy body image and relationship with food. After her own rocky history with food, withholding, and then later in life binging, she learned how to heal from the root causes around her broken relationship with food. As a result, she felt called to go to school and learn to teach other women how to do the same. She graduated from the Health Coach Institute as a holistic health and life coach in 2018 and is the proud owner of Free to Be Coaching, and author of the book Finding Freedom. She's a proud Purdue alumni living in Arizona with her husband Chad and 2 children. We look forward to talking more about healthy relationships with children and food in this episode of Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Philippa Squared with the beautiful, irreverent Philippa Scott. And I'm Pippa, the other Philippa Cox. So we have one ex-doula and one ex-midwife about to talk to this beautiful woman all the way from Phoenix, Arizona, Melissa Rohlfs. So Melissa is a holistic coach. She's a holistic health and life coach, I should say. And her specialty is all about food. Now you might be thinking, what? What on earth are we talking about food for with a holistic life and health coach? But food is so incredibly important to our health, isn't it, Melissa? So, Melissa, just welcome and greetings, a great big handshake from across the Pacific.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here with you guys.
It's so exciting. It really is exciting. So, Melissa, I would love for you to talk about how food actually impacts our health, particularly when we're pregnant and particularly when we've got little babies and little kids and they turn into teenagers, don't they, Philippa?
They do.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I feel like postnatal depletion, that depletion of the system can last for decades if we don't get it right. How did you get, before we get into that, Pippa, do you mind if I ask Melissa to just tell us how she got into this work? Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I never intended on going into this. It's actually because I became a mom that I went into it, which is kind of crazy. So a little bit of my journey is our kids are 27 months apart. So our daughter's now 16. Our son is going to be 14. And our son was newborn, not sleeping through the night. So I was exhausted. My husband was traveling for work. So I felt like I was doing a lot on my own. Our daughter had undiagnosed sensory processing disorder and food allergies. And on top of that, I was just diagnosed with PTSD from childhood trauma. So like the perfect storm. But all of that led me to meet with a naturopath and learn about the impact of nutrition on overall health, because with my diagnosis, I tried medicine. It didn't work for me. And so I went the naturopathic route. And really that worked. That was amazing. Like learning about how my vitamin levels were tanked and my mineral levels were tanked. And I thought food was only about weight at that point. But this really opened my eyes to help me realize that food impacts your mood, your energy, your immune system, so many things. And so that really transformed my journey and caused me to do what I'm doing right now. So that's a little bit of my story.
Amazing. Thank you. That's awesome. So go ahead and answer Pippa's question.
Remind me what it is, please.
Why
I was talking about
is
something
it
else.
so
It was very big.
important?
It was very big. Why is food important?
It's a macro question. It's talking about why is food so important when you're pregnant, when you're a young mum, when you got kids and they all end up being teenagers and being adults. And particularly in the Western world, you know?
Yes. Yes. It impacts everything. It affects your mood. It impacts your energy. It affects your immune system. Obviously, weight. I think we mainly associate, at least here in the States, food with weight, but there's so much more to it than that. And it's just so important. And I think that, so many teenagers need to be aware of this. And so many moms need to be aware of this. And so many women and people, especially the moms, because we're the ones who are raising the next generation. And, when you're pregnant and you're growing that baby, like everything you're eating is going right to your child. That's affecting their growth, their development. It's getting right passed on to them. So it's so important what you eat starting as soon as you get pregnant until all the way through, really, because it's life.
Yeah.
It's everything.
Yeah. And the other really interesting thing when you're eating when you're pregnant is that if you're eating CRAP, as in junk,
Yeah.
it increases your likelihood of developing complications like gestational diabetes, like pregnancy-induced hypertension, like preterm birth.
Totally.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
I like the idea of thinking about food as medicine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a common enough idea that food should be like when you're thinking about what you're putting in your body, how is this going to impact all of the parts of my body that are going to be impacted by this? And if you're absorbing things like sugar or if you're drinking sugar alternatives with like aspartame, how is this as it going to impact my body? But also when you're putting food into your body, thinking about it as medicine, because we can think about, well, let's just avoid the junk. But what if we go all the way to how does this actually serve my body? How does this heal my body? What can I be doing here?
Yeah,
It's
I
such
love
a
that.
different mindset shift because, I very much grew up with, okay, I just eat because I'm hungry or I'm bored or I need something. That was never my mindset as a child. So that shift is so powerful. And I think we do need to think of it that way. Like, how does food affect me? How is this helping me achieve the life I want to live? How is this helping me with my goals? How is this helping me show up in the world? Because all of those things are a piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally. Totally. And it's really interesting the way that as mothers and fathers, how when we're talking about food and when we're cooking food and even going into the supermarket, it can really impact on our kids as well. Even if the way that we're talking about our body image, looking at ourselves in the mirror, thinking, oh, we're so fat, we have to go on a diet. And the types of food that we're actually cooking for our kids. It has a massive impact on the next generation, doesn't it? Are you able to expand a little bit on that, Melissa? Because I find that a really interesting area of mindset.
Yeah, it has a huge impact. And I think that more is caught than taught. And I definitely grew up with in the home where the mom was never happy with her body. She was always on a diet. And then we were, going to the cookie jar and eating all the cookies. And so it was very confusing for me as a child because I'm like, here you are eating all the cookies, but then you're dieting and you're exercising. And what does this look like? And so a lot of that got passed on to me, not because she sat down and explained it to me and this is how we do it, but it's just what I picked up on. And so I think that children are very receptive and they pick up on everything. They pick up on what we say to ourselves, what we do when we see our reflection in the mirror, what we're eating, what we're feeding them. And I think the one thing that kind of gets my goat a little bit, if you will, is when moms do this whole like, oh, well, I can't eat what I'm feeding you because I'm on a different plan. So I'm going to eat this and you can eat that. And I love the idea of everybody eating the same thing. Not that, if there are allergies or certain circumstances, of course, there's grace for that. But just the idea of like, I need to withhold, I need to deprive, and I'm going to not eat what you're eating because it's bad or it's not healthy. Like, no, that doesn't foster that healthy environment with food.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally get that. And what about Philippa or Melissa? Did you ever grow up in a family where you were sitting around the table at dinner time and you were not allowed to leave the table until every single pea was lifted up from your plate?
Do you know there's a picture of me? I must have been around 6 or 7 in my pajamas and my dressing gown, literally asleep at the table because I couldn't leave. And in our house, it was always, if you don't eat your dinner, you don't get dessert, right? I just don't serve dessert. Don't serve dessert. And I've always underplated my children. So I will give them less than what I think they might want to eat because I would rather them sit with that, see how that feels, and then go back and get some more rather than feel like they need to finish. And I hate waste. I hate it. Like it's one of my things. I don't like waste. I have a whole bunch of chickens and a and worm farm. So what does get wasted doesn't get wasted. Somebody eats it, right? But I would rather leave it in the bowl and put it in my husband's lunchbox the next day than have it sit on a plate and not be eaten. So I would rather them come back and go, yep, I'm actually still a bit hungry. I'll get some more, rather than you have to eat all of that to get a treat or a reward at the end of it. And it's such a big thing. This, you've got to eat what's on your plate. And I just don't see it as healthy. And I can't imagine I imagine I'm preaching to the choir because, that you would be looking at all the, but there's so much to it, right? There's so much to all of that. What do you find the biggest habits, I guess, or the biggest things from our own childhood that we bring forward with our own children? What do you think the worst ones are, Melissa?
Well, I think the cleaning your plate is a big one, and then I think too, as moms, we tend to be like, oh, well, you didn't eat that. Let me finish that. Let me eat that last bite. And then we start eating from their plates. And we're really not teaching them how to listen to their bodies. Because I think part of what I get to do is help women learn how to listen to their hunger and fullness. And so if you're full, your body's saying that it's full and that's okay. You don't need to keep cleaning your plate. And so I think that's one. I think the whole like labeling of food is good or bad, and really kind of this relationship that we have with this food is good and this food is bad. And I ate the bad food, so I need to over exercise or I need to deprive myself the next day. And there's a lot that goes around this. And I think diet culture is a big piece. And we've been taught that we need to follow a certain plan or a protocol to lose weight. And in some cases, yes, but in other cases, we just need to learn how to listen to our bodies and what our bodies need. And we haven't been taught that.
Yeah. No, we haven't, have we? That's such an interesting comment, because we are not meant to be eating as much as we are. In fact, that we're saying that the generation that's coming up, like my generation, is going to be the first generation that the life expectancy is going to go back. So like my grandmother lived till she was 90 something. My mother lived till she was 80 something. And from what the statistics are saying with the lives that we have for the 40 and 50 and 60-year-olds now, is that we're going to be dead younger than what our mothers or grandmothers were. And that's the generalization across the board. And that's basically because of the decrease in health. And a lot of that has got to do with food.
Do you know?
Yeah. Can I just say something
Yeah,
quick?
of course.
This is something that really tweaked my interest. I was listening to a podcast about a week ago, and they were talking about type 2 diabetes and how type 2 diabetes is reached pandemic proportions across the Western world, and now it's even gone into India and Asia. And it's massive, it's huge. And they're calling it a lifestyle disease. And one of the arguments about calling it a lifestyle disease is that it's a misnomer. Because let's face it, we have food ads and the bad food ads around dinner time every single night. Go figure. I really want some of that golden arches or that other little chicken dish. Or if not, a Subway or something. Whoops, did I say that? No, I didn't. Delete that. No, but seriously. And all the specials on junk food. There's always specials on junk food. So when it's in your face all the time, calling it a lifestyle disease is kind of a little bit of a misnomer when it's actually forced into our life the way that it is. What do you think about that scenario?
It's reminding me of something I just saw, and that's what I was looking for. Is I just saw an article today that said ultra processed foods do not cause obesity, says U.S. government's top diet advisors in bombshell review of current evidence. Studies have been biased. And it makes me wonder, like, well, what are these people thinking? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, if our life expectancy is decreasing and obesity is increasing, diabetes is increasing, if all of these things are increasing, what is the cause? What is the culprit? What can be the common denominator amongst all of those things?
I would love to know who funded that research.
That would be very fascinating to know, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I have a funny feeling there could be a conflict of interest there. Yeah, because when you're looking at it, it's interesting how we've got the different health advice. Like 1 year, eggs were really, really bad. Now they're the best thing. Salt was really, really bad. Now it's the best thing. Dairy.
All of conflicting advice.
Yeah.
I wanted to share with you a story I think you'll find interesting. So my husband is 53 this year, next month. As a 3-month-old, he was diagnosed as a celiac. So he grew up, and this is back in the day when the only gluten-free bread you could buy came from the prison, and it was like a block, right? Like it was a brick. And so it wasn't nice to to eat or anything else. My husband grew out of his symptoms of celiac at about 17 years old, which for me, I was like, okay, it's an autoimmune disease, which means it's all about gut health. And maybe he got to a point where he could overcome that, despite the fact that everybody says it's not doable, right? So I'm like, okay, I get that. Maybe maybe things changed in his gut. Fast forward, I love making fresh bread. It is one of the memories from my childhood, my mum making loaves of fresh bread. That smell, and in my naughty days when I would go out to clubs, I remember coming home at 3 or 4 in the morning and smelling the fresh bread from the bakery, and it's like, oh, right? Like one of the best smells. Anyway, I would make all this beautiful fresh bread and he won't eat it. Do you know why? Because it's not square white bread that comes in a plastic package. He was so, I guess, traumatized in some ways by what he was restricted from eating or what he felt he couldn't have during his childhood, that once he had the opportunity to decide for himself, he chose everything he knew that was probably not good for him because he had the choice instead of being forced not to. It's interesting the way that often what we feel we can't have becomes the thing we choose for ourselves, even though we know it's not the best for us, because we have the right to choose now. And I think that a lot of this comes back to how we as parents or how we as children were framed to think about things. I think one of the interesting things for me reading in my young years as a mother were around the idea that the French have wine at the table, the children get to partake in wine, and they don't have alcohol problems later in life, right? They don't binge drink and have these problems with alcoholism. because it's just readily available and it's not seen as something bad or off limits. It's just something that's there. And so there's a healthy relationship with it. I think one of the things that's missing is a healthy relationship with food, but that actually starts as not having a healthy relationship with ourselves and our sense of our ability to make choices that are healthy for ourselves. So food is just one of the mechanisms, right? It's just one of the things in our world that is vitally important, but it's like sleep too, right? I'm doing a sleep consultant's course, so I'm reading all about sleep, and Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, is absolutely fascinating. But my daughter, who's a young mum, she's got an 11-month-old, she posted this thing on social media the other day talking about how, you're a mum because you stay up later than all the kids, than everybody, even though you're bone tired, but you just want alone time, right? So, and everyone on her post just kept saying, "I feel so seen. This is literally me." And I don't do that anymore. When I'm tired, I go to bed. I don't stay up for alone time, partly because obviously my kids are teenagers now, so they're up later than me. So that's not alone time when they're all up. But we don't make healthy choices around lots of good things, whether it's sleep, whether it's food, whether it's being in a toxic environment for our workplace, all of these things we don't necessarily make healthy choices about, even though they're vital for our overall wellness. And that comes back then to a sense of worth and honoring our self-worth. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree with that, because that's usually what it comes down to, is that we believe that we're worth taking care of and we're willing to do what we need to do that will give us that result, right? So one thing I've been working through this summer is there's some stuff going on. It's like, okay, so what do I want to happen at the end of this? And so I think about the end goal, and it's like, yeah, I've got to do this to get that. And I think it's the same thing with our habits, with our sleep, with our food, whatever that might be. Like, we need to make sure that what we're doing is in alignment with what we want. And those habits and those behaviors match that, because it's important. And I think that, to your point too, with food, like, the tricky thing with food is that we need it to survive. There are other things that people use that aren't healthy or great ways to cope with things, but you don't need those things. You don't need alcohol. You don't need drugs. You don't need the cigarettes, but we do need the food. And I think that's where it can get a little bit confusing for some people, is we need this to survive. It's a necessity. So I think it can make it a little bit tangled in our minds, maybe.
Yeah. And we're at a point in human history where food is so easily to come by. Like, we just go into a supermarket and we can buy oranges in summertime and pineapples in wintertime and mangoes from Mexico. It's just incredible what we can do. So it's all around us all the time. And that's something that we haven't been used to as in human history ever. It's only in the last 2 generations that we're able to refrigerate food and freeze food appropriately. So our minds have a lot to catch up on. Isn't that true? Yeah.
So what do you find are the biggest things that you come across, Melissa, and what are your top 3 hacks, or your top 3 things that you find you deal with most with clients, with young children particularly, around food?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I think the first thing is, I think just replace judgment with curiosity. It's really easy to judge and criticize, whether it's ourselves or our child, or, oh my gosh, you ate too much or you didn't eat enough. Like, just be neutral. Just be neutral. Be curious. Oh, you didn't eat everything on your plate. Are you not hungry? Can I get you something else? Like, just, I think replacing judgment with curiosity is really powerful. I think, too, based on the age of the kids, invite them into the process. We went through this stage with ours where I was just making stuff and they weren't eating it. And then I was getting mad and feeling like I did all this for nothing and nobody likes my food. And now I'm a short order cook and I have to make all these meals and blah, blah, blah. But if I had just been like, what sounds good to you? What would you like? And given them some ownership and say in the process, it probably would have had a different outcome. So I think bring them along, let them get involved with what you're planning, preparing, shopping, like, bring them into the process. Let them feel like they have some say over it. And I think teach them how to listen to their bodies, like, Are you full? Are you hungry? What's going on? What does your body say? What does your tummy say? Where are you at? Like, I think you just can't go wrong being curious.
Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
that's beautiful.
I have one teenager in particular who is very in tune with what it is that her body wants and needs at any particular time. And so she will say, have we got this? And I'll be like, no. And she'll be like, oh, well, because that's what my body wants right now. And she doesn't, when she has sensory stuff and, with her ASD, she doesn't always want to eat and she's just really good at following that. But I can't cater just to her, right? So, because there are 6 people. So sometimes 7. So I have to just cook what it is that I'm cooking. But I'm also like, I love the no judgment thing. If she doesn't want that, she is capable of making something for herself. And whatever that looks like, whatever that is, that's fine, because that's what her body's telling her that she feels like and wants. And she'll go through stages, because with ASD, and ADSD, we get hyper fixated on food. So there was a period where for 2 months she would make herself this creamy pasta, bacon, onion, mushroom dish, and she ate it every meal for months, and then she didn't touch it for 6 weeks. Sorry, 6 months.
Yep.
She just made it again the other night, right? Like, but they can go through these things, but that's okay. It's fine, I think that's a big part of that non-judgment
comes in. Yeah, but I think the trick comes in when we feel like we need to create this experience and everybody has to eat the same thing. And it becomes a reflection on us if they don't like it. Well, that's not true. Like, it's just that they don't like what you made. It has nothing to do with you. And so I love how, what with your daughter, like, she didn't like what you guys were eating. She made her own thing. We're at a stage where our kids are starting to do that too. Like, okay, you don't like this, then make something else. What would you like? Here are your choices.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's difficult for families with toddlers, with like little kids, because quite often they don't like something. And so, as you said, you end up as a short order cook. So, and I love the way you've got the curiosity into it. That's brilliant. But if we just dial it back a little bit more, when kids are transitioning from milk feeding to solid feeding, what are some of the tricks? What are some of the hacks you can give the mums on how to actually start this food journey for their children well?
I did not do this well. So I am not speaking from experience. Like, I will just be the first to say that. But I think, one thing that maybe a relative shared with us that helped was just let them try different things. Like, keep offering, remind them your taste buds change. This might not taste good now, but it might taste good later. So I think just continuing to offer and give them choices. I love the whole idea of, like, you can choose this or this. And as the parent, you're good with both options. So that way they have some control over what they're getting. I think that can be helpful. But I think just, encouraging them with fruits and veggies and to eat a variety of different foods. I think a lot of parents, it's easy to get stuck in the rut of doing the same thing over and over because they know their kids will eat it and we want the easy button. But I think the more variety that they offer and the more that we can encourage them to try different things, the wider their palate's going to be. And I think that helps with the pickiness because they're willing to try new things.
Yeah, and I love that choice, because that choice, either A or B, gives them control. And food, and I know this from working and from experience, it's the one way you can control yourself, isn't it? And that's where eating disorders come into play, because I've got power over the one thing that I put into my mouth. And so that's a really great way to nip that in the bud, to give them that choice, to give them that control. I love that.
And I think too, you could even start the conversation of how does that make you feel? I think one thing that has worked in our favor, and this probably doesn't sound great, but our daughter, she vomited every night because she was allergic to gluten and dairy. We didn't know that. So we figured out what was causing her to vomit. And now she's like, I don't want those foods because they just remind her of vomiting. So I think the more they can understand what's happening in their body and how food affects them, I think that's more empowering to them, and they're in a better position to make choices for themselves that serve them well. Our son didn't have that struggle. So I have to be a little more mindful with them of, okay, when you eat this, how do you feel? And so I think it's just helping them reconnect with their bodies and understand how foods make their bodies feel.
That's excellent because you want to know something? I know when I go to a Japanese restaurant and I have Japanese food, I have the sushi, I feel fantastic. In fact, when I traveled around Japan, it was the first place I ate like a horse and actually lost weight because they eat so well. They eat beautiful food and they take such pride in their food.
And your body felt the effects of that, right?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing that I'd love to broach with you is the actual preparation for food and infusing and making it a ritual or making it full of love. How does that fit with you, making that ritual and that love around food and food preparation?
It's been a work in progress because when we first had kids and I was like overwhelmed and exhausted and doing all the things, I was like, I just feel like I need to make something and have the people eat. But like, I think as my relationship with myself and food has evolved over time, it's become that. It's become like this beautiful way to bless them and to serve them and to really nourish them and help them enjoy the experience of the food, because the goal is not just to eat. Like, there is so much more to it than that. But I think we get busy, we get caught up in day to day life, and we just think we need to eat when really it's about connection. It's about connecting with yourself, because food is very sensory. You know, you've got the look of the food, the smell, the texture, the taste, the company, the conversation. Like, there is so much that goes into that. And I think the more you can bring people into that experience and have them be a part of it, I think as kids get older, especially, that can be really exciting and just a beautiful way to be together and create connection and community around food.
Absolutely. And it goes just to the premise that the life of the family happens in the kitchen.
Mm. But it's not just it's more than a saying, right? It's actually it's the oxytocin release that occurs when we eat together, when we, do that together. So eating together as a crew releases oxytocin. That's why if you go out to dinner with your girlfriends, you feel better. You get an oxytocin release when there's food involved with company. It's actually a beautiful thing. And of all the places that it could happen, why not? Right? Like, it's oxytocin is such a feel good hormone.
Yeah.
We need it more in our world. We need
Yeah,
more.
absolutely. And it releases the norepinephrine and more digestive enzymes as well, because you're in that rest and digest situation, aren't you? That state, that connective state, which is fantastic. So it's like a beautiful hormone party coming to your belly.
Yeah, I think too, there have been so many studies that show families that do that together, so many times a week, the children are less likely to struggle academically or with peer pressure or different things. Like, there are studies that support the child's growth and development and behavior based on that connection around the table.
Yeah. Yeah. It's beautiful, isn't it? And it's part of that cohesive family.
And it is about the no judgment, right? So the last thing we want is for mums to walk away from this conversation going, well, I hate cooking dinner. I hate cooking. I hate all that's associated with having to do the groceries and the meal plans and all those things, because it can be really overwhelming and it can be really big, especially if you don't enjoy that process. If that is not your wheelhouse, then it can feel huge. It actually wasn't mine. It was not something that I enjoyed doing for a long time. I have to say, 14 odd years ago, I got my first Thermomix and it changed everything, right? Like, I am not here to promote Thermomix, but I have had at least one in my house, sometimes two, for the last 14 years. And it changed my relationship with cooking because it made things easier for me, right? So for me, it actually changed everything. And my children will use it. It's a really amazing thing. But then then I was working full time. I had 4 children. I was, all those things. Even the Thermomix wasn't enough to get me out of the funk, right? But I also wanted to be able to really think about what food I was putting on the table. And I discovered this incredible app called Copy Me That, right? So I started using this app because I love to collect recipes because I get really inspired when I see it, but then I can't ever find it again. Right? So I downloaded this app and I started just saving my recipes to this app, and then I realized that I could shop to I could menu plan with the same app, and then I could shop from the app. I still use it today to shop from, even if I haven't um, done a meal plan, because it just makes my life so much easier. So the last thing we want is to feel like mums and dads who hate doing that part, for them to feel guilty around that. But if it's not your jam, if you find that really hard and you struggle to make it happen, then find some hacks, find some ways to make that an easier aspect of your life, because regardless of whether you like to do it or not, it's a have to. We need it to survive, right? So whatever that looks like for you, find some ways around it, because it's not going away. Can't ignore it. And you might as well make the best of it in whatever way you can, and make it feel as good as it possibly can for you, because life happens. I'd struggled with morning sickness through 4 pregnancies, and food was, my best effort at food for myself during those weeks was often chips and gravy or Vegemite on toast. Right? That's all I could stomach. So my children weren't getting the best of me. There was a lot of eggs and stuff like that. So, but that's okay. We can't. We've got to. We can't judge ourselves for that. Yeah, I think
I think
judgment's big.
to your point, it's a journey, right? Like, it doesn't sound like you are now where you started. And so I think just give yourself permission to grow and evolve and figure out what you need in that season. Cause that's the thing with motherhood. It's always changing, right? Like, I got really used to that 9-in-1 nap time. And then the child dropped the second nap and we were down to 1. And it's like, okay, you're always like constantly evolving and changing. So just give yourself permission to do that, because it's going to change. It's a work in progress. We all.
And that's about living in the gain, not the gap, right? Like, have you read that book, The Gap and the Gain? So when we live in the gap, we're thinking about our ideal and where we want to be, and then we judge ourselves against what our ideal is, as opposed to living in the gain. Who was I 5 years ago? Who was I 2 weeks ago? How much have I gained since then? And having pride in ourselves for where we've come from, as opposed to just the fact that we're not where we ideally want to be, because the ideal will always change, right? As we continue to grow, we're going to change the goalposts on ourselves, because we know we can be better. So we'll never get to that space, but look how far we've come. Oh my gosh, right? So yeah, we need to start thinking about living in the gain, not the gap. I love it. It's a great
And
book
we
if you
don't
haven't
do
read
that a
that.
lot.
No, it's a phenomenal book. I encourage anyone to read that. I can't remember who it's by right now, but it's The Gap and the Gain. There's so many incredible things out there for us to add in, right? To be thinking about. But food is such a big issue. I've got we're doing the food stuff with my granddaughter right now, and she's this beautifully big, chunky baby. She was, born chunky at 9 pound 3, and she has thighs for days, right? Just perfection. She's so cute. And she's still breastfed mostly. And we're just doing, she doesn't have it. She only got 2 bottom teeth, and she's had those same 2 bottom teeth for about 4 months now. And so she's not eating lots of different foods. She's primarily still breastfed, and she'll taste. So lots of finger food that she just tastes and tries. And, her mum, because of her own sensory stuff, doesn't eat a lot of variety, but we do. So she eats off of our plates and she tries lots of things. And she loves walking around with a big, a big bone and just sucking on that bone and getting lots of tastes and stuff. And interestingly, her mother ate really well as a baby. Her favorite thing was like a 4-bean mix that I'd moolie up back in the days before I had a vitamizer. I'd just moolie it up and she'd eat anything. This kid would eat anything. But now, not so much. So, we have to acknowledge that they're going to change as well. Despite what we do, we haven't failed somewhere. They're going to have their own taste buds.
Mm. Yeah. And even our taste buds change throughout our life, but don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting personally. I was always a really fussy eater. I was one of those eaters that a mother would go, oh my gosh, really? I was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And then I went from the land of plenty and I went traveling for a few years, whereas living, on a shoestring. And food, because I wasn't really interested in food, was my last priority. So I went from nothing to nothing with weight. I was so skinny. But when I came back to Australia, because I'd had these years of not eating food much at all, I came back and I liked everything. Suddenly I loved food because I didn't have it, because I was more interested in traveling than I was in eating. And I found that absolutely extraordinary, that my taste buds just changed. And they're continually changing. I remember only just recently, last, say, 10 years, I started to enjoy olives. And that was through a trip through Spain. And they were just there. Before then, I couldn't stand them. Couldn't stand the look of them, the smell of them, let alone the taste of them. And now I love them. So it's true that our taste buds do change throughout the life. So for any mother that has a finicky baby, there is hope. I am living proof that there's hope.
Would you say, Melissa, that the best thing we can do for our children is to model the kind of behavior that we want for them, or the attitudes that we want for them?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, think about it. I feel like raising children, and this is kind of like their petri dish, right? Everything they know and they view the world is through the lens that they have that is created in our home. And so I think, I remember going to college and being like, oh, your family does things like that. That's not how mine did it. And that was kind of my first awareness of how different things were. So yes, I think so much happens in the home, and the modeling, the behaviors, the talk, everything that we do impacts them. So I think that is the most important thing. And that's why I love to work with moms, because their relationship with food in their body impacts generations. And I don't think we realize that. I don't think we see that, but that's the truth. Because I even today was thinking back to, oh yeah, my mom did this because her mom did this. And I was like, I just broke this generational thing. I didn't even know it.
And we have the power to do that, don't we? With awareness, with desire. We have to want to change, though, right? Like, we actually have to want to change it for ourselves and the next generation. And knowing that we can't change it back up the line, but we can change it for those to come, the ones that we have influence over. And it's free. There's freedom in that for them, right? Because then they get to actually choose how they want to show up around it, because it's been healthy for them to begin with. And it's never too late. I don't feel like it's ever too late,
Not at all.
How
Never too late. Ever. Ever. As long as you're vertical and as long as you're breathing, it's never too late, Philippa.
Totally. What would you say is the most common, I guess, pain point that mums come to you with? What do they say mostly when they come to you?
They feel blah. They have tried everything. They feel blah. They feel overwhelmed. They don't like the way they look. They don't like the way they feel. They do not know what to do. They've tried all the things and nothing has worked.
Yeah.
And so what eventually works for them?
Changing their habits and their relationship with food.
So it all boils down to the relationship with food. So the thoughts that we think, the emotions that we feel. Yeah. And what is a quick hack that our listeners can take away from this? How can they actually change their mindset about
I
food?
think being aware that you even have a relationship with food, for so many people, it's such a concept they are not familiar with or they haven't heard of or not considered. In fact, I was talking on another podcast recently and she's like, I don't have a relationship with food. And by the end of the conversation, she's like, wait, I do. And you've just helped me realize that this is a piece of the puzzle. And so I think just being aware that you have a relationship with food and giving yourself permission to explore that. What do I think about food? What do I believe about food? Where does that come from? How does that affect how I show up and how I relate to food and what I use food for in my life? Because for me, it was a coping mechanism. I mean, it was how I handled the overwhelm, the exhaustion, the frustration, feeling pulled in every direction as a mom and not feeling like I was enough. That was my go-to, was the food and the sugar. Didn't work.
Yeah.
It
And
rarely
that's
does,
emotional
does it?
eating huge. It's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I know that my relationship with food is usually one of, ugh, I have to eat again. Like my body's telling me I have to eat, but I don't have time to eat. So it's often it's a thing of inconvenience, And whilst I don't mind cooking, I actually quite enjoy cooking for fun and cooking to create, but I don't enjoy necessarily cooking and then eating that thing straight. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm much more likely to make something that I'll give to somebody else to eat, or I will make something that will sit in the fridge. So like a chutney or something that, and then we'll use that later or give it away as a Christmas gift or something. So I enjoyed that side of things, and I have a whole acre out there of permaculture garden, like it's which is all organically grown, and I love that aspect of seeing where my food is coming from and eating what comes straight off the land. But I am feeding people every day, and when I just said to you before, I just smashed in. I had 10 minutes. I smashed in some leftovers and, our homemade pesto from our beautiful basil and so on. So it's beautiful ingredients, but I don't. It was just something I had to fit in because my body needed it, rather than um, sitting down and actually having a purposeful lunch break and things like that. I just find it's something that doesn't happen very often for me. So I'm quite aware of my poor relationship with food. When I do eat, I try to eat well. I try to eat things that are medicine for my body, but it's an afterthought as opposed to being very purposeful. I'm also aware that I'm in a interesting, busy phase in my life, so
I
I'm
was going
not
to say that
judging.
it's a season. Good. Because those seasons change, right? Like that's the thing with motherhood, is it's changing and we have to be adaptable and go with it because it's really easy to get swept away otherwise.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It changes almost daily, doesn't it?
Mhm. And they always want to eat, those kids.
It's funny. People used to say to me, "What's the difference between having 3 kids and 4?" Because I had 3 in 6.5 years. Sorry, 4 in 6.5 years. So there was a tight turnaround time. And people would say, "What's the difference?" And I'd say, "Well, the washing seemed to quadruple overnight, and someone is always hungry." Like that was for me. It was just somebody always needed to be fed something, and particularly when you're feeding on their own times. And it was really interesting to me actually noting the differences in my children and their own natural metabolisms as well. So I had some children who would feed, sort of quite. They might feed every 3 or 4 hours or every 2.5 to 3 hours or whatever. I had one child who would feed every hour to hour and a half, but she would have a very short feed. So she was a snacker, really fast metabolism, still does. She'll eat what seems like often, but very small amounts. And so her metabolism is obviously quite fast, but she doesn't need a lot. She just needs it often. And most of us are not ever Well, most of us never even, I guess, are told what has been observed. And if you were brought up in a time when you only fed 4 hourly, and so on, which is what my husband grew up with, like, that was you fed then and you didn't pick them up in between and blah, blah, blah. So nobody would have ever noticed what he would like, how his eating pattern would be and what his metabolism would look like. So, and then we throw children in school, right? And we tell them they can only eat at these times. So now they're not even following their body.
Right.
So I think those are all big parts about it. If you're a snacker, you need to eat more often.
Absolutely. And like you said, we've all been conditioned to eat at noon because that's lunchtime. Disregard if my body's telling me it's time to eat. No, I have to eat by the clock. Gosh darn it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And the other thing, just a tiny bit of a segue, is the timing of food. Insofar that we're taught that we have to get up, we have to have breakfast straight away, then we have to have a morning tea, and then we have to have lunch, and then we have to have afternoon tea, and then dinner. And quite often dinner is quite late. And when you're looking at natural therapies and Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, they actually say that our body isn't designed for that amount of food and that timing of food. Like, we shouldn't be eating breakfast till about 10 o'clock in the morning. We should be having our main meal around 1 o'clock and a rest after that. Oh, exactly what they do in the Mediterranean countries, don't they? And then a light meal just when it gets dark, not at 8, 9 o'clock in the evening, I should say. So that's really interesting. And intermittent fasting, I know pregnant women aren't going to do that. There's no pregnant women that are going to intermittent fast, are there? Or breastfeeding women who are going to intermittent fast? And that's becoming really, really popular now as well for people that aren't in those categories. So just to wrap up, Melissa, what were the main points that we were actually talking about today? What are the the key takeaways from our lovely conversation today? Melissa, what are your key takeaways? What would you really love to tell the people who are listening to this?
I think replace judgment with curiosity. That can be really powerful, not only with yourself, but also with your children, your family. I mean, even on social media, just imagine what that would look like. That's a whole other thing. But I think that is really powerful to replace judgment with curiosity. I think acknowledging that there are different seasons and stages of motherhood and, find the hacks, find what works for you, find what serves you best in the season and know that it's probably going to change and grow as you do. And that's okay. And I think just bring your kids along for the journey with health and wellness and listening to your body and eating nourishing foods. And I think include them and look at what you're modeling. Like, how is your relationship with food? How is your perspective of yourself? What is your body image like? And what are you portraying to them that maybe you're not even aware that you're doing? So I think maybe just do an assessment of where you're at.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And particularly with the self-awareness, because we generally are not self-aware because we've got food in the refrigerator, we've got food in our big pantries, something that our grandmothers didn't have.
I love when my children say to me, Mum, you don't have food here, you have ingredients. And I'm like, yep.
You have so much food in your house. I love it.
But it's ingredients. It's not food that they can just go and eat often, right? They're like, Mum, there's no food.
They actually have to make something up with it. Oh dear.
But isn't that a real reflection of the fact that we're such an instant society, right? They just want to be able to eat it now instead of taking the time to do the thing, even if it's just a salad sandwich.
Yeah, well, now we've got cut up vegetables at the supermarket for the busy mums, which is better than nothing.
Easy.
Tell us, Melissa, how can people work with you? How can they find you?
Yeah, my website is free, the number two, the letter B coaching.com. So freebcoaching.com. There's freebies there, there's resources. All of the places I'm at on social media are there. So that's kind of just the hub for everything.
Amazing. We will link that in the show notes for you as well. So once again, thank you so much for joining us. It is, I imagine it's actually reasonably late over there for you too in Arizona.
No, it's just 8:00 at night. We're good.
Oh, well, that's my bedtime. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Thank you for giving us your wisdom and your time. Pippa, thank you for leading us. And listeners, please follow along, share the podcast. This is amazing stuff for people to understand because it is, as Melissa said, one of the most important building blocks of our life, and we can't be without it. So we need to put some effort into getting it right. So thank you very much, Pippa. Signing off yet again from Philippa Squared, Parenting by Design.
Yes. Bye, everybody. Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you for having me.